That is sort of an introduction that we can then segue to talk about some of the content of the Suitors. So, why is it I thought it would be useful to talk about my gradual training is that the way I feel about myself today, I'm a bit like the relief teacher. You know, like usually you got a teacher, then the relief teacher comes in, right? And the relief teacher can say whatever he wants. And ultimately, relief teacher knows also that while the responsibility is to like impart some real knowledge, I don't have the burden of like holding, like Dharma teachings as a whole, right? But the flip side also is that actually nobody knows the relief teacher, lah. So maybe I just give a bit of background myself. So like what Brother Jerry was saying, my journey actually started very, very early on when I was like studying for my A-levels. And at that point in time, it was true that I was procrastinating quite badly. So I didn't do 2 years, for the whole 2 years of junior college, I completely didn't do any maths homework for 2 years. And I actually deliberately like failed the maths test for 2 years. And I remembered very clearly that, every JC last time you have the prelim for A-levels, right? So I did my prelim test, and then I remember getting my score, and then I saw my maths, I was like, what's an O? So I went to ask my teacher, I was like, hey, what's an O? And then she said, O means you have an O-level pass, which means you have failed. So that started like getting me into a panic. I was like, oh my gosh, okay, this is going to be the real deal, right? So I really had to sweat for this. And coincidentally, just a few months before that, when Borders bookstore was still around, those of you old enough to know like Borders bookstore, right? I actually bumped into this book on Zen Buddhism. And I was reading this book, I think it's by D.T. Suzuki, if I'm not wrong, actually. And I had started reading about like the Zen. I was like, oh wow! And there was something about the Zen Buddhism, like koans, right, the gongans, right, that had this ring of truth to it. And what was also interesting was actually that in that book, embedded within parts of it, there were instructions on how to meditate. I mean, there were very typical Zen instructions of, sit very squarely, full lotus, hold your hands like that, partially close your eyes and so forth, right? But what struck me were the instructions of, you watch your breath, and that actually is the main instruction. So when I was panicking for my A-level preparation, that somehow stuck in my mind. And in the middle of the 2 months from prelims to the actual A-levels, when I was doing the whole 10-year series, like every single day, I was sleeping like maybe less than 6 hours a day. But I made it a very deliberate point to actually sit and take 10-minute breaks, to meditate, according to the instructions of the book. I have no idea why that idea made sense to me, but that was the idea that I went with. And the interesting thing was that it became very effective because whenever I was doing my work, right, I was 100% focused. And then whenever I meditated, yes, there were times that I nodded off, but the effect after I sat for 10 minutes was that when I sit down and I focus on the work, the mind was just completely clear. And it allowed me to actually not concentrate on my fears. I didn't have to think about, okay, I'm going to fail my A-levels because which crazy person doesn't do work for 2 years and then squeeze everything in 2 months, right? So there was that fear and that anxiety, but after I meditated, the mind was just very calm. I was able to just focus on the work. And long story short, I did well enough that I can actually go into university, and study physics and chemistry later on. But that's the second thing. And the interesting thing also about this. In between, so after the A-levels, in between, I was actually very, very close to leaving Buddhism because I had a girlfriend who was Christian and a charismatic Christian. So she was trying to persuade me, and at one point in time, I actually went to my mother and I said, I'm going to convert. Then my mother said something very wise, typical Singaporean housewife. She's like, you buy something, do you just go to the first shop you want and then you just buy straight away? You don't, right? You shop around first, right? So my mother was like, why don't you go and do some research first? And I was like, yeah, okay, that makes sense, right? So when I go and read about Christianity, I was like, the more I read about how the Bible came to being, I was like, okay, something dodgy about this. Then I read about Judaism, and I was like, okay, something to respect but doesn't resonate. And then Islam, and Islam actually is something that I was actually very inspired by it because unlike Judaism and Christianity, there's no concept of an original sin, and there's a lot of similarity to Buddhism. And there's a lot of focus on like purifying your behavior and conduct and your mind and so forth. So I was like, okay, very good, but then I don't believe in Allah, so yeah, cannot lah. Then I went back to like reading about Hinduism and then like Buddhism, and the strange thing was that when I read about Buddhism, I was like, okay, this is it. I was like, I come back one circle, born as a Buddhist Taoist, then come back one full circle. I was like, okay, Buddhism makes the most sense. And clearly the relationship I had didn't last, right, as a result of that, right? And then fast forward, I went to a meditation appreciation course that was conducted by Kwang Ming San, and that's when I experienced like proper instruction, sit down and meditate. I was like, oh, okay, this is very similar to what I learned from the book, right? But it's like really very enjoyable. Then I went to go and study. And when I was in university, I'll be quite frank that I did not keep the 5 precepts. I was drinking like a fish. To my eternal shame, I actually created a wine appreciation society in my university. It's just to give you all appreciation. I'm not like any holy person or anything, right? So we all start from the common ground, so to speak, right, of like not knowing about the 5 precepts. And this ongoing debate I always had with my Buddhist friends, right, were why do you have to keep the 5th precept? It doesn't make any sense, right? I mean, you drink alcohol. It's not as though that people who drink alcohol are bad or anything like that. So I can come back to that later on. But there was also the part of me, I'm a bit schizo, I guess. There's another part of me that also was like very curious about like actually what are the other Buddhist traditions. So when I was in university, while I was procrastinating, I also went to like the Jade Buddha Temple. I was studying in Houston, so I went to the Jade Buddha Temple, which is run by a whole bunch of like Taiwanese there. I also went and investigated into the Tibetan tradition. My university professor in Rice University was a specialist in the Tibetan tradition, specifically in the Nyingma Dzogchen, which is very focused on like meditation as well. And also I went to like read up about the Theravada tradition and so forth. And I also even went to the extent of like exploring Vipassana. So I actually did the Vipassana 10-day course, the meditation retreat in the Dharamsala. So I tell people that I went to the Dharamsala to learn meditation. Oh, you learned from the Dalai Lama? I was like, no, I went to go and do like Vipassana, right? And it was a very surreal experience for many reasons. For one, it was the very first meditation retreat I ever went to. So I had no idea what to expect. And it was the first time also I went to India. So I think like most Singaporeans, I thought that India was about the size of Malaysia. I thought that India very small. I thought India very hot. So I went there, right, with this backpack, right, with clothes that were packed for the European summer, not knowing that Dharamshala is in the foothills of the Himalayas, and not knowing that the time I went, right, was in the monsoon. So what happens in the Indian monsoon in the Himalayas is that it rains every bloody day, and the temperatures drop. So it was like 15 degrees Celsius on average. So most days, I literally wore everything I had because I had not enough clothes and I had no winter clothing. So I just wore everything, like 3 layers of underwear and all that stuff, right? I was just there. It was so cold and so hot. And the other thing that was really surreal was that the experience of using your willpower to tide you through. There were periods of time when I sat down right in the middle of the retreat, right, and it was just absolute unbearable pain. And there was this one moment in the retreat when suddenly, right, in the middle of like sitting, and I was just like, I'm gonna leave. I can't take this anymore. When the pain suddenly just disappeared. And the pain suddenly disappeared, and then I could actually sit for hours. I would just sit there for like 1 hour, 2 hours, that kind of thing. And I was just like, oh wow, this is very, very, very strange and very weird. I guess the third thing that was very unique to the Dharamsala retreat, right, was is the only Vipassana place I know of where, the Vipassana retreats, if you're familiar with it, every night they will actually play the video with Gunkaji actually like talking about like, Dharma and stuff like that. And the other thing that was really strange was that the subtitles were all in Hebrew. And I was wondering like why, and you can't ask questions because it's all in silence, right? So I was like, why is it that the subtitles are in Hebrew, right? And when the retreat ended, I figured out why. Because in the whole class, maybe 90% of them were Israelis, actually. the retreat manager himself turned out to be an Israeli as well. So all of them go to Dharamshala to like do this like Vipassana thing for some reason. So that was like very surreal. Now, if then I mentioned like what Brother Jerry mentioned, like back in university again, this was during my summer break. When I went back to the university for my final year, I came across like Ajahn Chah. So it was the book by Joseph Jack Confield, The Still Forest Pool. And I read Ajahn Chah stories. I remember this friend of mine, Buddhist friend of mine, telling me that, oh yeah, this Ajahn Chah, you have to read up about him when you can because he's a very cute-looking monk. He looks a bit like Kermit the Frog. So that words like stuck in my head, right? And I came across it, oh, Ajahn Chah. Then I saw the picture, oh yeah, this is the guy who looks a bit like Kermit the Frog. So I started reading the stories. And I was like, wow, this monk is very wise and very, very funny. One of the stories that stuck in my head was, there was this young Western monk in Ajahn Chah's monastery. So he would come to Ajahn Chah to ask for leave, and then he'll leave, and then he'll go to another teacher. Then he'll go to leave that teacher, then he'll go to another teacher, and then he'll go to another teacher, and then he'll just keep going around. And then when he went back to Ajahn Chah for the second time and was leaving for the second time, Ajahn Chah said, "You're like a man with dog shit in your bag, but you think everywhere smells bad." You're like a man with dog shit in your bag, you think everywhere smells bad. And that, right, when I read that, it was very true to me because I realized that I was like that man with dog shit in my bag, but I felt that everywhere smelled bad. Oh, this tradition not so good, that tradition not so good, and so on and so forth, right? So that left an impression and set the conditions for later on when, after I had graduated, I had been through a whole bunch of random nonsense. And I happened to take this from Kwang Ming San, where it was a talk by Ajahn Brahm on how to be happy, right? And it's a free distribution talk. I think you can still get it nowadays. And I put it into my parents' car. I happened to be driving that one time. I only picked it up because I saw that, oh, Ajahn Brahm is a disciple of Ajahn Chah. So I was like, okay, this should be pretty good. And I remember driving that car and listening to Ajahn Brahm talk. I think it was a talk hosted by BF, if I'm not wrong. Yeah, NG was like opening the thing. It was in Kwang Ming San. And Ajahn Brahm then cracked one of his most politically incorrect jokes that he said came from his father. So his father apparently had this joke of like, what pleasure does a monk have? Any guesses? Like, what pleasure does a monk have? Huh? Okay, how do you spell that none? So the nun that he said that his father said was N-U-N, and I mean I was driving and that took me so much by surprise that I was laughing so hard that I literally almost crashed into another car. So I literally had to pull aside to just complete my laughter before I went on. I was like, oh wow, this guy makes a lot of sense. But the other thing that this talk made a lot of sense was him talking about the Four Noble Truths in a completely different way. So he said that everyone talks about Buddhism and everyone talks about how Buddhism is all about suffering, the cause of suffering, the end of suffering, and then the way leading to the end of suffering. And Ajahn Brahm pointed out very rightly that actually, in practice, Buddhism is actually about happiness. It's about happiness, how to be happy. Sometimes we are unhappy, and why we are not happy. That actually is and if you think about it, right, it makes a lot of sense. And I'll try to map it for you guys like more correctly, right? Happiness, right, is the cessation of the origins or the cause, actually, that's the other term for it. Happiness is when the cause of your unhappiness is completely disappeared, right? The way to get to happiness is the Eightfold Path, the Fourth Noble Truth, right? Why you're unhappy sometimes, and that's the First Noble Truth, right? Suffering exists. And why is it you're unhappy, right? It's because of, one thing. Which is the reason why in one of the Suitors, the Buddha also said that the First Noble Truth, the fact of suffering, right, is to be fully understood. The Second Noble Truth, the causes of suffering, right, is to be fully abandoned. The Third Noble Truth, right, that when you fully abandon the cause of suffering, right, is to be realized, meaning that you have to attain that yourself. And the Fourth Noble Truth, the Eightfold Path, is to be developed. So when I only know this now, like, when I heard Ajahn Brahm talking about it, I was like, oh, okay, it makes a lot of sense. And it still makes a lot of sense. And that's actually the beauty of the Dharma, right, that as you develop this. So because of that talk on that CD that almost caused me to crash my parents' car, I then went to listen to Ajahn Brahm in the talks that was hosted by BF, and I was like, wow, this guy actually has got that ring of truth to him, right? So then I decided to sign up for the Buddhist Fellowship then executive retreat, and this was organized in Chiang Rai in 2010. And it was a transformation for me in many ways, which I'll explain in just a little bit why. The first thing, right, was that when I came to BF office to pay my deposit, I don't know whether it's true now, but back then BF had a lot of lawyers. So the terms and conditions, right, I read that, I was like, wow, this is as bad as the Vipassana retreat one, you know, because I remember there was one term that's like, we reserve the right to kick you out of the retreat if you do not obey, like, you know, the precepts or whatever it is, right? And I was like, okay, never mind, I just sign, you know. And that was a very stark contrast from the first night when we had the retreat. Because when we went to Chiang Rai, and it was a journey, like you fly to Chiang Mai, then you take a 2-hour bus ride to Chiang Rai. The first night talk, when Ajahn Brahm was there, he was saying, you know, I remember that he said that, for those of you who just come here and, you know, you keep falling asleep in your meditation, there's a solution for you. It's called the bed. And so I was like, oh, wow, this is very different from the Vipassana retreat where at 4:30 in the morning, right, they'll just ring the bell on your face to wake you up, you know. So I was like, oh, okay, this seems a bit different. And he said that, you know, just keep sleeping. If you're, especially for those who are, you know, you're very tired from your daily work, just sleep. Sleep as much as you can. You don't have to turn up for the morning meditation. You don't have to turn up for any of my talks. And I was like, great, this is exactly what I've been looking for. And so the first 3 or 4 days of that retreat, I vividly remember that I slept like 12 to 14 hours a day, not including the fact that I went for afternoon spa treatments and I slept during the spa treatments as well, right? But the end result of these like 3 or 4 days of what seems to be complete luxury, right, was my mind was just completely still. And the thing that was very interesting for me was that, yes, I could only meditate for about half an hour, but the degree of stillness, right, after you come out of meditation, you know your mind's like very still, very calm, very powerful. The degree of stillness, right, was way more still than anything I ever experienced, even including the Vipassana retreat. So that was the thing that was very striking for me. I could immediately draw that comparison. I was like, the memory of that Vipassana retreat versus this one, the stillness is completely different. And I didn't think about like further like why that was the case, but I was just like, okay, this is very, very interesting, and maybe this teaches on to something. So I actually bought the book Happiness Through Meditation, which also is published as Mindfulness, Bliss and Beyond. And I started reading that book. And that became like the guide for the rest of the executive retreat. Ajahn Brahm had a lot of people coming up to him to ask questions about, you know, divorces, challenges in life, and so on and so forth. I was like, okay, I'm not going to like bother him at that point in time. So I just used that book and I started reading about that. The other interesting thing about like sleeping 12 to 14 hours and then the mind actually getting more still and being able to like watch the breath for half an hour, then gradually increasing, right, was that there was no effort required as well. So when I was doing the earlier retreat, there was a lot of like strong effort and willpower required to like bring myself to sit, because it's like, you know, when you know something causes you pain, right, you don't want to go there, right? At that point in time, towards the middle part of the Vipassana retreat, right, I saw the meditation cushion, I was just like, oh my gosh, okay, another hour of like pain, right? So that was like the thinking. But in this particular case, right, because I was sitting on a chair, I was very comfortable, I sat down, the mind actually just kind of like leaned towards like, okay, this is really very enjoyable, you know, it's actually really pleasant. And the sleep also very naturally reduced. So from 12, 14 hours a night, right, I very quickly caught up and I was like sleeping to 7, 9 hours a night. And I remembered that what then happened became like even more strange. Because what then happened, there's like one afternoon I was just like meditating in the hall, you know, and I was just like you know, being myself, like very calm, very peaceful, watching the breath and just enjoying every single moment of the breath. It's just like Ajahn Brahm's good friend, Ajahn Ganha, which is a nephew of Ajahn Chah apparently. So Ajahn Ganha uses the Thai word sabai. You know, for those of you who've been to Bangkok enough, you know what sabai means, right? It means like just relax or like enjoy. So, you know, Ajahn Ganha talks about when you meditate and you enjoy, right? It's like sabai, 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 sabai. And that was how the breath was like to me. It's just like, wow, this is so nice. You're just like watching the breath every single moment. And when it stops, and you just watch and then you just wait and then it just starts again. It's just so nice. It's so gentle and so relaxing. When all of a sudden, there was this impression like, I thought someone came up, to be honest, I thought that somebody from the BF came to like shine a light in my face or something like that. Because I was like, whoa. And it was what the hell is this? And there was this light that popped up in my mind. And I was so surprised that I actually opened my eyes because I thought someone had shown a flashlight or something like, or turned on the light to make an announcement or something like that. But the strange thing was that when my eyes opened, the whole meditation hall was so dim. And it was actually nobody turned on the light. There was no light. Like, I mean, there was light, but it was not like, no one turned on a light or anything like that. So that's when I was like, oh, so this is what Ajahn Brahm was talking about in the book about like, oh, the nimitta appearing in your mind. And he had been talking about it in the retreat as well, but I was thinking to myself that, it wouldn't happen to me one lah, that kind of thing. And when it did happen, it just took me completely by surprise. And that sparked this confidence that maybe what this teacher is talking about really is the way. So I remembered asking a question in that retreat, that I gave a paper slip and asked like, this nimitta appeared, what do I do next? And I was, I don't know whether Brother Chang Wee is here, but he was there with his whole family then. I was talking to one of his sons who then was a young boy at that retreat, and he said, oh my gosh, I actually remember that question being asked in the retreat. And I was like, yeah, that question probably came from me actually. And Ajahn Brahm then said that, if that nimitta comes up, just ask yourself, what was the cause for that? The cause for that was that you actually allowed your mind to become very still, and you did nothing. You were not doing, you were just knowing, enjoying the breath. Then the mind actually, like, that light popped up. So continue doing nothing lah. So I said, okay, that's very good advice. And I continued just like doing nothing, and I just watched the breath. It was a bit volatile. There were times when the breath was, when the nimitta, the light, right, would be very flickery. There were times that the mind would just decide to go to the breath, and I said, yeah, sure, just enjoy it, right? And it became more and more stable the more and more still the mind got. And as the mind became more and more still, right, it became more and more bright and more intense. And the other interesting thing that happened was that the amount of sleep I required, and I did not use an alarm clock during this particular retreat, the amount of sleep I required, right, went from 7 to 9 hours a night to 4 hours very naturally. And there was no force or anything like that. I did not force myself to wake up. I did not force myself to go to sleep. I just went to sleep whenever I needed to go to sleep, and I just woke up whenever I did. And the mind was just completely powerful, And when you're in the middle of that nimitta and it got brighter and brighter, at moments it felt as though that I was staring into the noon sun, like right now outside. It was just so intense and so powerful. And I remember thinking to myself, my God, I think I'll go blind, if this happens, right? If this continues. But because it is not a physical image, there's nothing burned into your retina, it's actually a mental image. So when that happened, I was just blissing out. I mean, I was just like, wow, this is really wonderful, and this teacher is probably like saying the right things. And in retrospect, when I look at my old copy of Happiness Through Meditation, there are parts where I underlined it, and I go like, yes, this is exactly it, because I was really experiencing like what was written, and oftentimes this happened before I actually read the parts in the book as well. And then there was an experience that I had that was completely life-changing. So those of you who are familiar with Ajahn Brahm, you always know that he always talks about how meditation is better than sex. Meditation is better than sex, right? And there was one afternoon, that retreat towards the end, when I was just meditating, watching my breath. And the interesting thing also, as you progress on a particular retreat, right, is that when the nimitta comes up, it tends to come up more easily as well. So even though we sit down and just watch our breath, the nimitta will just like pop up and just be in your face and go, hi, here I am again, And so that happened, and the nimitta was getting brighter and brighter. When all of a sudden there was this moment when it felt as though that someone turned a dimmer switch. It's just, like the sound effects in the cinema, it's like, there's no sound now, but it was a bit like, and then the whole thing became dark. And it was accompanied by this sense of, I was just like falling. And it felt as though that I was just falling into an infinite, I was just falling with no end inside, just falling. when all of a sudden there was this explosion, of like bliss and ecstasy. And when I tried to describe it to my friends, right, I said that it felt like way better than sex. I made the mistake of trying to explain this to my colleagues who were still into a lot of worldly pleasures. And their response was, who have you been having sex with? Yeah, which is completely besides the point. Now if I were to explain it, right, it's actually more that it was a pleasure that felt as though that I had taken all the sexual, okay, there are no kids here, right? Okay, all the sexual orgasms that I've experienced in my life, condensed into that one moment, multiplied by 1 million times. It is out of this world. It's literally out of this world bliss. It's like, think of the most intense enjoyment you ever experienced in your life, right? And it was way more than that. And that was when I was just so excited by this that I came straight out of the state. That is not a true first jhana. That is what Ajahn Brahm calls a yo-yo jhana. It's that moment when you actually experience the intense pleasure that comes, right, when you actually lose the five sense world completely. And it is for this reason that the Buddha in the Suitors talks about the first jhana as the ending of the world as you know it. Because if you think about it, day-to-day life, right, you are completely not separated from the five senses. But when you actually experience the jhana for the first time, your mind, right, actually recognizes for the very first time, right, the sheer pleasure that exists, right, when you have none of the five senses. And if you are actually more stable into the first jhana and beyond, you actually are completely beyond the five sense world. But because I'm still on the path, still very much of a novice, but the experience was life-changing for me because when I immediately came out that experience, there were two things that were in my mind. The first was actually that whatever that Ajahn Brahm was pointing to, right, that this is what the Buddha taught, this is probably the right way forward. The second thing so that gave me a bit of very strong confidence in this particular teacher. The second thing that stuck in my mind was, this is why monks don't need sex. And this is why actually like good practicing Buddhist monks would not actually be indulging in the five sense world. Because they have a pleasure. It's as though that you have $1 million and someone tells you that, oh, here's $10, would you want it? And then you're like, okay, I mean, yeah. Well, yeah, maybe, I'm not sure. It's a very rough analogy, but that's exactly that. So, coincidentally, on the flight back, I so happened to actually share exactly the same flight as Ajahn Brahm with Angie and her partner then. And Angie was very, very kind that she actually like arranged for me. I think probably Ajahn Brahm was not very happy about it because he probably wanted to rest. But she actually she allowed me to actually sit next to Ajahn Brahm on that same flight back to Singapore. And during that flight, I was asking him a whole bunch of questions like, about the bhikkhuni ordination, like, why is it there's all that furor and all that stuff. And I also asked him that question of like, okay, Ajahn, you keep talking about like the suttas in your retreat, right? How do we find out more about this? And I will always be eternally grateful to him because he said that his words were, go and find out for yourself. There are so many of these good translations out there. Just pick up one copy and just start. And I asked him, where should I start? Like typical Singaporean condition. It's like, where should I start as the beginner guide and all that? And he said, just read any of them. Just start anywhere, but just start. And so I took his advice onto heart. And the other thing that he also gave the advice was that you might also want to explore like teachers that talk about the suttas, and you can read, you can listen to mine. At first, when I heard that, okay, if Ajahn Brahm is listening to this, I'm sorry, but I thought that he was being a bit arrogant. But now, after all these years of listening to his Dhamma talks, his deeper Dhamma talks, not the talks that he gives like normally, right? But every second and fourth week, the BSWA actually publishes the talks that Ajahn Brahm and his monks give on suttas. So they actually cover like specific suttas. After listening to this for the past like the past 7 to 8 years, right? No, actually now 2018, yeah, almost 9 years already. After listening to all the various talks, I realized that particular piece of advice he gave was very, very critical. Because what has happened is that Ajahn Brahm and Ajahn Brahmali, Ajahn Sujato, what they have been doing, right, is that they have been comparing notes with other monks that are comparing the Pali canon with the Chinese agamas, the Ahanjing or the Dazhangjing, Ahanjing, that kind of thing. And these are the two parallels. And if you know a little bit about Buddhism, you know that actually these two evolve completely separately. They are separated by maybe like 2,000 plus years. And it's only now, right, in this day and age, right, that people are starting to compare like for like, okay, this sutta and this sutta maybe are like analogs. How do they compare? And Ajahn Brahm has been very, very forward in like actually picking this research, right, to actually share with lay people. There are actually monastics out there who feel that the suttas and the deeper teachings, right, actually should not be taught to lay people. Ajahn Brahm actually is quite adamant that this is not true, and that there's also the some monastics who believe that the lay people cannot reach jhanas. And Ajahn Brahm is like, no, that's completely not in my experience as well. So they have been very much at the forefront of like putting together the research. It's still evolving. I wouldn't say that this is the final word, but the fact that he was pointing me to his research as really at the cutting edge was actually very lucky. And as a result of this, right, I then started reading the suttas myself and started asking him questions like, oh, actually what you say here doesn't like compare and gel with like, what they say in the suttas and so forth, right? But the other important change that happened as a result of that jhana experience and the retreat was that I completely gave up alcohol as a result of that. I completely gave up alcohol. The confidence in the triple gem, the confidence in the Dhamma especially, was actually reinforced. And it was also through listening to all the various talks that Ajahn Brahm, kept focusing and emphasizing that the first step of the Eightfold Path is right view, but you need to know just enough right view to then actually take action about it. So if you look at the Eightfold Path, right view, and everyone has to focus a lot about the philosophical parts about it, like the dependent origination and so on and so forth. But if you logically think about it, right, actually the most important thing, right, I backtrack. If you think about it logically, the only way you can perfect right view is to become a stream enterer. Right, stream enterer means that you have got unshaken confidence in the Dhamma. It means also that you have no sense of self, right? But the only way to remove your sense of self is the Eightfold Path. So it almost seems like circular logic, right? You want to perfect right view, then you have to be a stream enterer. But to be a stream enterer, then you need to actually walk the Eightfold Path, which starts with right view, right? So it almost seems as though that, oh, this is a circle that I can't get out of. But I actually have a slightly different take on this. And my take is this. The only important thing that you need to take away from right view, right, are maybe two things. The first is cause and effect. Right? If you believe that there's cause and effect, then you would actually agree, right, that it makes sense for you to put the causes in place to do something about it. Right? If you don't believe in that, right, then that's the wrong view. I mean, there's nothing that will happen. But that's actually the most important thing. The second thing, right, is actually the understanding of the Four Noble Truths on a very superficial intellectual level. To agree the intellectual flow, that the logical flow, that yes, there's suffering. The cause of that is actually that you want something, you crave something, and that logically, once you remove that cause, right, then you wouldn't suffer, right? And that the Eightfold Path is that particular way. Once you have these two factors, these two things in, right, the most important thing for each and every one of us is to practice the rest of the Eightfold Path, especially conduct. Things like right speech, things like right action, right? Things like practicing right livelihood if you can. And also the second factor of actually putting into place, right? Actually, that's probably the most important thing because that underpins your behavior. The conduct, the intention, right? The Samma Sankappa. And the intention, right, that why is it that my experience with meditating under Ajahn Brahm has been so different from the past experiences I had was because that I went there with very different intentions. When I went to that executive retreat, the intention was that of, I just want to relax. I just want to let go. I don't want to think about my work. I turn off my cell phone, I completely let go of things. And that is the first of the three parts of right intention, renunciation. And the other two important things are kindness. I was kind to my body. I didn't force myself to wake up at like 6:30 in the morning to like join the first meditation. Nobody woke me up with a bell at 4:30 in the morning because we were in a 5-star hotel and they just leave you alone. And gentleness. It was a very gentle path of like, okay, just enjoy the moment, feel the comfort, enjoy, soak yourself in that luxury, soak yourself in that pleasure, that gentleness. Okay, you don't feel like doing this, okay, that's perfectly fine. Just find something else that you want to like be, that suits your thing. It wasn't a sit there regardless of how much pain you experience because you're burning off bad karma. And that is completely nonsense, unfortunately. So that was the intention that I went in. And that is actually a very critical piece. Without that intention, right, even if you are doing what appears to be right speech, right action, right livelihood, actually the core of your Eightfold Path is already gone already. You're doing the wrong thing already. So simple things like, for example, if you're avoiding killing, right, but you're doing so with the intention, right, of like, I want to control this person, there will be no good fruit that comes out of that. And it will not benefit you in any way whatsoever. And it's very, very, very subtle. So this is the other part. Start off with like cause and effect, right? You believe in cause and effect. Then the most important thing is to cultivate this right intention and right motivation. Letting go, making peace with whatever it is. Just let go of the control, be kind, be gentle, and then actually put into place, around your life, avoid killing, avoid stealing, avoid sexual misconduct. Right, the first 3 of the 5 precepts, right? And then when you practice right speech, if you can start off with avoid lying first, but eventually you need to go to the other parts of right speech as well. Avoiding harsh speech. Avoiding malicious, divisive speech. You don't tell somebody something, right, to divide them and they go like, okay, this guy seems like he maybe believes in me, so I'll tell him something so that he will not believe other people, or he will be separated from his group. Right, that is the kind of like other layer of our practice that we need to cultivate. Avoiding harsh speech. So this one, I must confess, I'm still not very good at it. I have a reputation for speaking very bluntly, and sometimes I'm not very skillful in that sense. So I'm still working on that. Okay, but things like you don't scold someone. You bloody idiot, but just tell him that, maybe you're a little bit misguided here. Okay, but maybe not even that, maybe you want to like first understand what he's saying in the first place, right? Then the fourth part of like right speech would be avoiding useless chatter and gossip. All right. Oh, brother Jerry, right, is like doing this and that, or brother Pang Hong actually is like married and blah 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 blah. It's like, okay, you tell all this like for what, right? What's the point of that, right? But I think that this is where I think that especially in a fellowship like ours, we have to be very careful because there is an element and there is a use for talking and like social bonding, right, for building that fellowship. We just have to be very mindful when it starts going to like completely useless gossip. It's completely like not productive. And then when it comes to right action, right, there is actually the action, right, of like body, speech, and mind. I already covered like speech, right? But there's also the action of actually that you are putting in the effort, right, to reduce wanting and to reduce ill will. All right. So I've already basically summarized the first sutta, MN 41, which is the advice that the Buddha gave, right, to a whole bunch of lay people in this town called Saleya, and they asked him like, we're so confused. There are all these teachers that come here and tell us do this, do that. So why do people go to heaven and why do people go to hell? And the Buddha basically said that people go to heaven because they follow practice, they practice and they have behavior and right conduct in accordance with the Dhamma. People go to hell because they don't hold themselves to the right conduct according to the Dhamma. So the 10 things that the Buddha said then were the right action by body, speech, and mind. Body would be the first 3 factors, the first 3 precepts. Speech I already mentioned. Mind would be, so maybe I should repeat again. By body meaning that you don't kill, you don't steal, you don't engage in any sexual misconduct. By speech is you avoid lying, you avoid malicious, divisive speech, you avoid harsh speech, you avoid like useless chatter. Then the mind part is actually that you avoid wanting. You don't scheme and you don't like, oh, I really like Jerry's like microphone. That's not the right mental conduct to do. And also you avoid like ill will. And the last one is that the last one is a bit circular, but you avoid actually like the wrong beliefs. So you don't hold on to like wrong views like, oh, there's no father, there's no mother, there's no cause, there's no cause and effect in this world. That's actually the wrong view to abandon, and that's another like mental conduct that you want to cultivate. You want to not cultivate, sorry. So you can use your QR code to like scan and see the Majjhima Nikaya 41. I'll let you guys read that yourself. The further practice is actually, it goes beyond that, right? So I've mentioned about the first 5 factors of the Eightfold Path. The 6th factor, right, of Samma Vayama, right, Ajahn Brahm doesn't like this, but right effort, right? And then subsequently, Samma Sati, right mindfulness, followed then by Samma Samadhi, right stillness, not concentration, stillness, right? The Chinese translation for Samma Samadhi is 正定, 安定的定, right? Which means stillness. It's actually not like 正集中精神 or something like that. It doesn't mean to focus or to concentrate, right? So these last 3 factors, right, are also important for each and every one of us to practice. But the important thing to point out is that you need to get the first 5 factors in, right? Cause and effect, and then you actually need to practice on a day-to-day basis. And this is where the secular mindfulness movement, in my personal view, kind of get it wrong. The reason is because that if you just go straight into like use mindfulness, right? Oh, I'm just going to be mindful. I'm mindful when I have my affairs. I'm mindful when I'm like, flirting with that cute girl in the office. I'm mindful when I am like drinking alcohol. That is specifically what the Buddha calls wrong mindfulness, actually, right? And if you actually are able to get to any stillness, right, even if, say, for example, you experience that nimitta that I experienced, it will be the dirtiest nimitta you've ever seen in your life because you've got all the wrong conduct, right? But if you actually have the factors of the first 5 factors of the Eightfold Path in place, right, when you actually do practice mindfulness and you get to the still states, and the nimitta pops up, right, it will be the most gorgeous and the most beautiful and the energizing thing you ever experienced in your life. And this is the link, right, between your conduct. This is karma in practice. This is the direct link, right, between karma, and why it's important to keep your precepts with your meditation. You cannot get good meditation if you do not have right conduct in the first place. It is very, very critical. And this is the part where the mindfulness movement, I am actually of the view that the way they're going down that path, it will actually become more and more potentially misguided, because you have more and more people who will have the view that, I just need to be mindful, can already, that's enough, right? But that's not what actually happens in real life. So with the first 5 factors in place and you actually perfect it, you actually like keep perfecting it with your practice, right? Then you actually examine your mental conduct and you are aware, right, with the 6th factor, whether, hey, I've practiced these things, right? Do I get more angry more easily, or do I, become angry less often? If I am a sex addict, right, is the addiction increasing or is it like less? And do I tend to be like more particular about like the food I eat, Singaporean sin, so to speak, right? Or do I actually like become more like chin-chai about things, right? So that's actually the sixth factor of the Eightfold Path. Knowing whether, first knowing whether like, unwholesome states are increasing or wholesome states are increasing, and then asking yourself the question of like, okay, what caused this to do so? And then doing more of that. If it is a case that you're doing right conduct well and like wholesome states are increasing, then do more of that. If more of that letting go brings you more peace of mind, then do more of that. The other thing also to highlight here is that if the reverse is true, you do what you think is right actions, right? But then, there's more trouble. There's more turbulence. There's more like unease in my life, right? Then you need to actually, what you're required to do, right, is not to force yourself, but to investigate. dive deeper and ask yourself, is my understanding correct? Am I misunderstanding things? Do I have the right picture in the first place? Maybe it's my understanding is wrong, right? And so I'm doing the wrong things actually, right? So that actually is the sixth factor, the Eightfold Path. Then when you talk about the seventh factor, samasati, right? It's actually in very close tandem with the sixth factor when you're developing it. And what I mean by that is that you need to have mindfulness to know whether your mind is like wholesome or unwholesome, right? And then the sixth factor will help you like put into place like, okay, the effort I need to like investigate, and then what works for me to increase these wholesome states, what works to decrease the unwholesome states, right? I'll put that into place. And you do so by being aware of the four satipatthananas, like the things that you are mindful of. And that would be your body, your Vedana is translated as feelings, but it's not your emotions actually. It's actually the six senses, right, of like a like, you know, say to give the example of sight. The pleasant feelings would be like, oh, something looks beautiful. The unpleasant feeling associated with sight would be something looks very ugly, right? And then the neutral feeling would be, oh, I see like this computer is like it's neither pleasant nor unpleasant, right? There's no positive nor negative feeling associated with it. And that extends to all the other sense organs. Hearing, something that hears melodious, something that sounds very awful, and something that sounds neutral. Smell, something smells fragrant, like the flowers that we have here. Something that smells like rubbish, right? It smells awful, and something that smells neutral. So the second satipatthana, the second thing to focus on will be, of the six senses that you have, right? What are pleasant sensations? What are unpleasant? And then what is like neutral? And then the third one would be on the mind, right? To know when your mind is actually wholesome, to know when your mind is like tired, like my mind now is slightly tired from talking a little bit too much. To know when your mind is actually like peaceful and calm, right? That actually is the third thing to just be mindful of. Then the last one would be the dharmas, which in the original satipatthana, there are two things to be mindful of. The five hindrances. So the first one would be like sense desire, right? To know when there's sense desire. The second one would be the ill will, right? When you've got like ill will in your mind. The third one would be like tiredness, right? The fourth one is like a restlessness and remorse, and the fifth one would be doubt, that you experience a pleasant state and you're like, oh, is that really the way? Is that a jhana? Or you've got questions about that. So those are the five hindrances. And the other thing to be aware of is actually the opposite of the five hindrances. To be mindful, right, of the seven enlightenment factors or the seven bojjhangas. So that one I will leave you all going to read because I can never remember all seven of them. But these are the four things to be mindful of, right, that the Buddha mentions. The good news is, it's a whole mouthful, right? But in the Anapanasati Sutta, the Buddha actually said that whoever cultivates your breath to fulfillment fully develops the four satipatthanas. So you just need to focus on one meditation object, which is the breath, and that actually will bring you to awareness of the body, because in that particular sutta, the Buddha also says that the breath is a body amongst bodies. And so just to digress a little bit, when people tell you that you need to experience the body of breath, meaning that you have to experience and be aware of the breath in your body, that's not what the Buddha taught. The Buddha was just talking about just being aware of the breath, not the breath and the body. The physical body, the reason why people confuse the two is a Pali expression called experiencing with the body. But that's actually just an idiom for direct experience, actually, which is according to the research that Ajahn Brahmali has done. So you directly experience what is the pleasure of like being fully aware of the breathing. Then, like, if I go back to my experience in that particular retreat, right, when the nimitta popped up, the experience of the breathing, then when you develop like the beautiful breath, oh, it's so pleasant and it's so nice, that is the awareness of the pleasant feeling that's associated with that. So you're cultivating the second satipatthana. Then when the nimitta pops up, right, and you're aware of the mind, that's actually when you have the third satipatthana. You're aware, oh, I'm fully mindful of the mind. Because the nimitta is actually not your mind, it's like the mirror that reflects your mind. So you're aware, oh, actually my mind, right, they got some spots here because I accidentally killed it. I intentionally killed an ant or something like that, right? So that's actually the awareness of the mind. Then last, when you finish your meditation and you come out of it, you reflect, okay, were the 5 hindrances present? If you experience jhanas, right, and then that's actually when the hindrances are completely disappeared, and that actually fulfills one of the enlightenment factors of samadhi, right? You've experienced that. And you know that my mind now is purified, it's malleable, it's like bright. And you can then investigate other things. So that, through anapanasati, you actually will cultivate the 4 satipatthanas to fulfillment, actually. Then the last factor of sama samadhi, I cannot repeat this enough. It is almost always the 4 jhanas. Whether is it the Chinese or the Pali, it always talks about the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th jhana, or in Chinese it's 初禅, 二禅, 三禅, 四禅. It's always the 4 jhanas, and it's literally in both. So for example, the second sutta that I have on the Majjhima Nikaya 27, so this is the shorter discourse on the elephant's footprint. And it's a very famous one in Sri Lanka because when King Ashoka sent his son Mahinda to be a missionary to the kingdom of Sri Lanka, this was apparently the very first sutta that Mahinda gave to the Sri Lankan audience. But it is also very remarkable for me in another way that when you compare this sutta with the Chinese, right, it's almost exactly identical. You know, where they talk about, for example, when the Buddha talks about the 1st jhana, he talks about the 1st jhana and it's almost word for word, parallel. But then he finishes that by saying that the 1st jhana is something that is used by the Buddha, it's experienced by the Buddha. And this is a very important point to emphasize. If you actually truly experience the 1st jhana, that 1st jhana you experience is exactly the 1st jhana that the Buddha experienced. It's exactly the same state. It's separated from your 5 senses, you're enjoying unmeasurable bliss, right? And there will be the wobble that happens, which I still haven't experienced, but I'm just hearing, repeating whatever other teachers talk about. Then when you experience the 2nd jhana, and that's when the wobble disappears because that last little remaining bit of wanting disappears. And you've got complete confidence and trust in the pleasure. And you're just completely still for the first time in your whole life. And nothing moves, literally nothing moves. And then the 3rd jhana, when you see the separation between joy and happiness. And the 4th jhana, when you have got the happiness of no happiness, when you're completely equanimous. And what these 4 things are is actually a gradual progression. The 1st jhana, right, a gradual progression of letting go. It's not a progression that we normally think of that I need to attain these states. But these are states of progressive letting go. It's as though that you're letting go of more and more things, right? And then you're like a balloon that's just floating up. A balloon doesn't need to go I need to get to the stratosphere and then work towards it, right? The balloon goes, okay, I need to let go of this person holding on to me. I need to let go of the weights. And that's how the hot air balloon at least will actually float up. And that's exactly the same parallel here. In the 1st jhana, you're letting go of your body, and that's why you got bliss among, more than you ever experienced in your life. The 2nd jhana, right, what happens is that you have let go of your will. And that will be the first time, right, that you have let go, that will does not exist, but you still do. And then you're like, okay, how does this work? Right. The 3rd jhana is when you have let go of joy, right? And you have a happiness that is even more subtle and even more pleasurable than what you experienced before. And just wow, this is wonderful. Then the 4th jhana is when happiness itself even disappears. And all you have is this perfect stillness, but you're like, this is way superior to that happiness that I enjoyed. So the thing to emphasize here is that in one of the suttas, the Buddha describes things like, he describes how this is a path without groaning. And you have to ask yourself in your own practice, right? If you're sitting down and you're like, it's very painful, you have to ask yourself whether you're on the right path or not, right? And if in contrast, right, you actually find that it's more and more contentment and enjoyment and just pleasure. And the pleasure is just so wonderful that you're just I can just sit here and give this Dharma talk forever. No, I won't, okay? I'm just joking. Yeah. But you're just like so content, right? And you're just like, wow, this is so great. That is probably the right path. And if that is the path that helps you like let go even more and more, then that is probably the right path, that what the Buddha is pointing to. And that is the gradual training, actually. So you start first by focusing on your conduct. And you can read the Suitors yourself later on. I put this up really for you all to like figure out and ehi see for yourself, right? And you can see also like in the elephant's footprint discourse that the Buddha talks exactly like that. First, a Buddha comes in this world because there's aging, illness, and death. Then a person hears the Dharma, and because of the faith in the Dharma, then decides to become a monk. But the first steps of being a monastic is to actually focus on perfecting your precepts. And so then they purify their conduct. After they purify their conduct, then you find a place to sit down and like be mindful. And after you're mindful, then you start going inwards. You abandon the 5 hindrances. You start becoming more and more calm. You get into the jhanas. You then actually experience the deep states. You then actually like see for yourself the 3 knowledges of your past lives, how karma works, and directly experiencing the 4 noble truths. And only when you're fully enlightened, then you can say with certainty that actually what the Buddha pointed to, this is really the path. This really is the elephant footprint. The elephant is the Buddha, actually. So that is the gradual training from my personal experience in summary. I think that's maybe enough for today, unless, should I? I've spoken for exactly 1 hour, so yeah. Yes. Is it Q&A now?
Yeah, maybe, yeah. Thank you, this Brother PJ, for the very inspiring your life story on your this graduate training. Yeah. So I'm sure there are people who wants to ask some questions, or maybe you can share some of your life journey, your self discovery in how you encounter Buddhism. Usually,
yeah, please, yeah.
This is our regular so-called member who always posts questions.
Oh, sweat.
Yeah, thank you, PJ, for the life experience. I want to specifically ask about the Eightfold Path, 5 aspects of it: right view, right action, intention, right action, right effort, right mindfulness. So now it's World Cup season. So my intention is I want to meditate, want to get to your nimittas, but I also have World Cup to think of. So if I choose World Cup, so will I be following those 5 aspects of it? Because World Cup only once in 4 years. This one you can do anytime.
Yeah. So maybe your meditation, the nimitta would be a very special one. It's like a white circle with like black dots on it. Yeah. Jokes aside, I think that the important thing is to not be too forceful, right? And I think that what you are describing actually is a very useful question, because that is a dilemma that everyone tends to face, right? Oh, how do I balance between like the worldly conditioning and the needs that we have versus like the unworldly one of the Eightfold Path? And the only solution I have is to just say that just be kind to yourself. If your mind right sits there and your mind is actually not ready to like meditate, right, you can sit and meditate all you want, right? The nimittas will be very, very far away. So you might as well just watch the World Cup, And again, it's yeah, I just give you the perfect excuse for that, right? But actually, that was really the experience I had, and I still have to this day. In that, the question you have to ask yourself when you sit and meditate, right, is actually, do I really want to meditate, or am I forcing myself to because it is the right thing to do? And in my experience, right, the only time that willpower is necessary is that it serves as an emergency handbrake when you're about to do something wrong, right? Meaning, for example, if you're about to engage in any, like, say, sexual misconduct, then that's where it is the right thing to like, be heedful and like jam the brake and go like, okay, I'm not gonna go there, I'm gonna stay far, far away from this. But if it's something like the World Cup, I mean, quite frankly, you're not breaking any of the precepts. You're not a monastic, right? If you're a monastic, then I would imagine that Ajahn Brahm will probably have a lot of things to say about that, right? But you're not a monastic, you're a lay person, you're in this world. It's a bit of a harmless entertainment. I guess the thing also is that if it is something that you're indulging to the extreme where, it's causing tension to creep up in all your relationships, you're lacking sleep, and then that's causing you to break all your other precepts, then okay, you need to re-examine that. But if it's just a little bit of a moderate entertainment, I don't see why not.
Yeah, any other questions or comments that you want to ask our speaker? No? So if...
Please, yeah.
Any objections from the floor? Because only...
Most serious question.
No problem.
You talk a bit about the Four Noble Truths and Ajahn Brahm's version of it, of happiness. Sometimes you're not happy, and there's a way to be very happy, and the Eightfold Path. Now, sometimes you're not happy. It is because of craving, you see.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
But there's also this element of unhappiness because of fear. So is fear embedded in this, what do you call it, craving, or is it not at all? Because I do have suffering and I have fear, you see. So that's my question.
Yeah, I think that's a very good question, which is the usual speaker shorthand for saying that I don't really know and I'm buying myself some time, right? I think that the root cause of it, though, if you ask yourself, like, why is there that fear? How does fear arise? And the root cause for that is actually wanting and an attachment, actually. Actually, fear, right, arises because you have a very strong sense of identity. Yeah, you want, and how you come to being, right, if you read the Suitors, is because actually you want to, right? There's delusion actually feeds craving, and then that actually leads to you wanting to actually exist. Your five senses, right, are here, right, because you want to actually like experience and enjoy the world, not the other way around. So the fear arises because you already have that root attachment. So it's actually that root cause actually that leads to the fear. The converse is true, which is the reason why one of the signs of a fully enlightened being is that they have no fear, because they have no sense of self. They've let go of everything, So yeah, and I think that the other thing that just to share from my personal experience is that by walking on this path, I find myself actually like being less and less fearful as well. So I'll be completely candid, right? When I was young, right, I was terrified of ghosts, Like I would actually sleep in my own bedroom with the light on because I would be terrified of the darkness. But nowadays, right, just last in-camp training, actually, there were some of my fellow bunkmates they claimed to see like this white figure and all that stuff, right? I was sleeping peacefully. I was like, I don't think there's anything, but okay. So then, I mean, I was just like, okay, I'll just go there and I'll just do some chanting for you guys. So I did some Pali chanting for them, and that helped them to ease their fear. But I was just reflecting on it that, yeah, just 20 years ago, right, when I was serving in my NS, I don't think I would behave in that way. I would have been like terrified. I'd be like, can we change rooms now, right? And that comes from actually this letting go, and also the real understanding of like how things actually are. So I think that the fear is a derivative. It's not actually the root cause, actually. Yeah. So just a point to note to all the rest who have got no questions. The Buddha actually talked about the karma, right, for you to enjoy like beauty, wealth, and intelligence in the next life. And the karma for intelligence and wisdom in the next life is to ask questions in this life. So we have a brother who is an unfair share already. So
this is what Ajahn Brahm always encourage members to ask questions, so to be very be intelligent in the next life. We got one already.
Yes.
Okay, so you want us to be kind to others.
Yes.
But then that means others, you will create a chance for others to be cruel to you. So how will you think of this?
Thank you very much for that question. The key here is it's not just kindness to others, it's kindness to all, including yourself. So if you are kind to others but at the expense of yourself, then you're not being kind to yourself as well. Then you need to think to yourself, ask yourself the question of like, is this the right thing to do, right? How much can I take this, and are you kind to yourself? So the best way is to find a way to be kind both to others but also to yourself. If you have to protect yourself, right, then you can be kind to others from a distance, actually. But the main point is to not use that as an excuse, right, to then generate ill will towards others. Because ill will, anger, desire, all these defilements, right, they are a bit like acid, you know. They hurt the container more than whatever is directed to, you know. If you have a container of acid here, right, and then you've got somebody that you are directing that ill will to, actually you are holding all that acid in your own mind. It's very corrosive. So you have to protect yourself by taking care of yourself first, and then, you know, from a distance you cultivate the loving kindness, the metta, and so forth. That's actually perfectly fine as well. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Or you have a follow-up question? You need to have both yourself and others in mind. It cannot be just others and not yourself as well. Yeah. You have a follow-up question? Yeah.
Give some other people a chance. Maybe last question, one more last questions from the floor. If not, I think we have to close the service because later we have an ESCO meeting.
Okay, very good.
Yeah. No? Okay. No, then I will do some announcements.